All right. So first and foremost, thank you for tuning in to the fourth episode of our wellness webinar. Again, our goal is to be doing this every fourth Monday of the month, and keep tackling the subjects as we go. Sorry, we just had someone come in. We just had Sharon come in. So tackling subjects as we go. And I think to kind of start this off, what I want to say is when people start out with the nutrition programs or they go looking for nutritional advice, whether it's through some Instastar or whether it's something they're seeing pushed through social media, remember everything has its phases, fad dieting. You know, if you pay attention, keto has its cycle, intermittent fasting has its cycle, plant-based has its cycle. They all cycle through. And I've said this before, but the way we kind of look at it is I see those things like Batman's tool belt. Like there's times to implement those things, but it's not to me is a way of living long term. You know, let's look at keto, for example. Like keto works when done appropriately, but who is really going to go the rest of their life without carbs? And if we're really frank, your body doesn't actually get keto adapted until at least you've been 6 months with no carbs. Because of all the years that our body has been adapted to eating and working with carbs, you almost have to reverse engineer the way the body looks at energy, and that's to be in ketosis. So, you know, doing a cyclical keto diet where you go no carb and then you carb up on Sundays, that's why they call it a cyclical diet, because you literally feel sick for about 2 days until you get back adapted to it. So if you're really going to reverse engineer the body and you really want to become keto adapted, you're looking at almost a minimum of 4 months to 6 months before your body will actually do that. So, but again, my approach on what we want to do with this is we want to talk about the things that you normally won't talk about or hear about when you go meet with just a nutrition coach, or if you're meeting with some online guru, or even in some cases meeting with a dietitian
or a physician.
So that's where we're really trying to lead the way on this, because me and Jen are very blessed. We've been very appreciative of the people who have mentored us, that have helped us. We're very lucky and grateful for being able to go to age management conferences and learn outside of the traditional ways, which has really opened up how we can help people. So one of the things that I think people don't understand, and I'll let Jen address what the adrenals are and adrenal function, and then I'll let Hannah kind of go into strategies for adrenal support. But you have to remember is it's more than just picking out the right dietary program. It's more than just exercise. It's more than just cardio. There's a strategic plan that you need to put together, and you need to make sure that you have everything operating the way that it needs to be in order for it to function the way that you need it to. And one thing that we are under more than ever, I think, in the society we live in, is stress. And what I mean by that is, if you ask someone, or if you ask yourself, are you stressed? And the answer is probably, nah, I'm not stressed. It's a normal day. But that doesn't mean that you're not stressed. When you think of stress, it means that you had an abnormal day, like something really big stressed you out. And then I ask you, were you stressed? Like, yeah, today was horrible. Like, it just, this happened, this happened, this happened. That's what we associate to a stressful day. But we don't think about the fact that we're adapted to the stress levels that we see on a daily basis. Think about this like a workout. You start working out and you start doing a normal 5, anywhere, just whatever it is. Just say you're doing 15 reps and you're doing 3 sets, and you're just always doing the same exercise. You become adapted to that workout. And it isn't until you start doing a different type of workout where you're like, man, I'm really sore from that workout. Or let's say you go away on a vacation and then you come back to working out and you're like, man, I'm really sore. I was just doing that workout before. I wasn't that sore before I left, because you were adapted to that style of training. So until something shakes up the system, you think everything is status quo, but not everything in the body is working status quo. So Jen, why don't you jump in and just kind of hammer in on what are the adrenals and what are the functions of them?
Well, before I even go there, I want to kind of relay off of what you were just saying. When you talk about stress, the body, you think of emotional stress, or most people think of emotional stress. But what we don't realize is that working out is stress. Dieting is stress. Not giving your body the nutrients it needs is stress, or having a toxic diet, even a toxic lifestyle by what you watch on TV, the thoughts you think, everything that you consume. If you drink too much caffeine, it's all stress because it can't differentiate between good stress and bad stress. If you have a bad night's sleep, that's also stress. And so that's where all of these insults come, and it becomes insult to injury when you're looking at adrenals and you're stunted, because what most of us do when we're not losing the weight is we stress the body out more by restricting more calories and working out harder. And then it just you get yourself in this, pit that you can't get out of, because once the adrenals become taxed, and I know adrenal fatigue isn't really a word that some physicians like to recognize, but it is true, because the adrenal glands, which sit above your kidneys, they actually are responsible for cortisol and adrenaline, which are pumped out during fight or flight. We have this natural circadian rhythm of cortisol where you're supposed to have a trending high cortisol in the morning and it's supposed to dip, and that's supposed to give you energy. But when you are in fight or flight and constantly asking the body to make more cortisol to adapt to this lifestyle that's just really not what we're supposed to be doing, you then start to have a negative effect on some other hormones that aren't really mentioned, and that's DHEA and pregnenolone. And DHEA is the precursor to testosterone amongst some other hormones. And yes, males make testosterone in the testes, but for females, it's very much by way of the adrenal glands. And then also the pregnenolone, which is the precursor to estrogen and progesterone. And so, yes, like with women in the ovaries, we make other hormones, but there is a very important role that the adrenals make. And when we become too stressed out and cortisol has been pumping for too long, then we get what's known as the pregnenolone steal, because it's causing the body to then compensate by then downregulating pregnenolone, which downregulates progesterone. And we start to see issues like lack of sleep, issues with insomnia. For females, you might have night sweats and think that you're going through menopause prematurely. But once those hormones start to dysregulate, it becomes like you're trying to run uphill in mud. And then it also has an effect on the thyroid. And once that starts to go, it's a big deal. But it's really, really important to understand how the adrenals work and to make sure that for everything that you're doing that's a stressor, you're also giving yourself back something to fill your cup back up. So what I mean by that is, if you have been going really hard in the gym, make sure you're resting. If you are dieting, make sure that you're having days where you have a higher caloric intake. And whatever foods you're putting in your body aren't just things that are sugar-free, or I'm going to have a diet soda. It needs to be nutrient dense and fulfilling. Right. I don't know if I answered your question, but
you did, and you kind of even started going into where Hannah's going to take over some of the strategies for adrenal support. Like, so when we talk about, Jen kind of hit it up, being too low caloric in a plan can start causing stress in the adrenals, because you're putting too much stress on the body. I've kind of said this before, like, we know what the extreme side of undereating is. If someone has an eating disorder, and we know what the extreme side of overeating is, because the scale goes up and we can feel it in our waistline and how we feel. But for the typical person, the body can't differentiate between if you're the extreme side of low, the eating disorder, if you're the extreme side of high, someone who's just consciously overeating, or are you the busy person, or are you the dieter that has the mindset and been taught, I need to burn more than what I take in. But nobody's ever told you what's too little. Right. And the rule of thumb kind of is on anything under a negative 500 caloric daily basis, anything under 500 calories, negative 500 calories on a daily basis, at some point, like Jen indicated, you have to refeed the system. And so, in order to do that, because again, the body doesn't know who you are. It just knows that it's sending out a signal, I am hungry, and everybody's ignoring it. Until the point to where most of them, you get to a point where you're so hungry that you can't turn off that anymore, and you end up binge eating.
And I guess one thing that I want to mention is let's review what signs and symptoms are of adrenal fatigue. Because if we don't realize that, like it can be digestive issues, it can be craving sweet or salty food, or sometimes both. It can be weight changes where you're not losing weight, especially around the midsection. It can be sleep issues. It can be persistent fatigue. Also just reduced immune system. You're chronically getting sick. And so it's really important to start thinking about, okay, what am I feeling? What is my body trying to tell me? And like Jamie said, we are conditioning ourselves to think, okay, well, I can't eat because I need to lose weight, or I just need to power through this day and I don't need a nap, or I don't need sleep. And it really will end up catching up with us.
Right. So Hannah, what are talk about some of the strategies we've implemented over this course of time on the nutrition side?
Yeah. I think you touched on a couple of them already, but they're definitely worth talking more about. That number one, I think the thing that you and I see the most, at least, is just being in too much of a deficit. That, like you said, over 500 calorie deficit, it's just not productive at that point. When the adrenals are taxed so much, the body's not going to focus on burning fat. It's going to focus on putting that energy towards just keeping you alive and keeping hormone production up. With this adrenal fatigue and high cortisol output, a lot of times we see a lot more water retention too, because the adrenals are secreting aldosterone. So with aldosterone being output irregularly, we're going to see that stress water retention that no one understands. They say, well, there's no reason I should be retaining water right now, but it's due to that aldosterone insufficiency. And with that, we see a lot more electrolyte, not electrolyte imbalance. What's the word I want to use? We deplete electrolytes a lot more. So typically with these issues, we do see that we have to increase magnesium dose, which I know some of my clients are on this call, and I think everyone should be on magnesium pretty much for the rest of their lives. But usually when we see the adrenals taxed even more, we have to up this a little bit more depending on the person, because we know the body's going to be depleting magnesium more. With that too, we'll probably have to increase electrolytes, whether we're taking an electrolyte supplement, or we're adding more sea salt to our meals throughout the day. Again, it's kind of going to depend on the person, and a lot of it, frankly, the way we do it at least, is trial and error. We implement something, we test the response, get feedback, and go from there. So I think that for me, at least, the three main things that I start incorporating when we look at labs, we see that there is a cortisol issue, there is DHEA issue, or when we're seeing the symptoms that Jen mentioned, we look at, are they eating enough? Are they in too deep of a deficit? Are we increasing their magnesium? And are we appropriately hydrating both with water and electrolytes throughout the day?
Right. And then you brought up a good point too. Remember, stress also downregulates HCl production in the stomach. So, if you have a stressful environment, you're adding alcohol to it now. And let's say you're on a medication at the time, or we know we've all been on some medication at some point in time, that's all reducing down, or has reduced down, HCl in the stomach to the point where your digestion's off. Then that leads to SIBO and SIFO, which then leads to what everybody now knows or is being treated for, is going to be leaky gut, IBS, acid reflux, or GERD. So, your doctor is going to be telling you to take a protein pump inhibitor or take Tums or something like that, when the root cause of your acid reflux all stemmed from unmanaged stress. And then again, if you're drinking because of unmanaged stress, and then you get sick because of unmanaged stress, and now you're on a medication because of it, you have significantly impacted HCl in the stomach, and now all of a sudden you have this uncontrollable problem with digestive issues. And it could be constipation. It could be now that you have worse acid reflux, especially when you're eating red meat, especially if you have red meat with some alcohol, it's really bad. that's where this can go from. Again, that's why we wanted to start these, because again, there's a lot more to it than just jumping on or jumping into a nutrition plan. There is a lot of diagnostics that go into getting the client from point A to point B than just telling them to eat some macros to this point and eat some clean foods. There's a lot more that goes into it, especially if the client has tried XYZ diet and XYZ diet and they're not getting to the end goal and they're frustrated. Like we've told people, it's usually sometimes it's not the effort that people put into it. It's because they're working against things that are very hard for them to get through, which is gut issues and hormonal balance issues.
Well, and I think I don't think, this is why we have always had this mission of pulling in a full team with Hannah's expertise and Jamie, and when Jake's on, because the exercise needs to match the nutrition plan. If you're doing a heavy leg day, that shouldn't be the day that you're calorically deficient, or it should be after a day that you had a high caloric intake. If you are trying to really maximize what you're getting from your dietitian and your personal trainer, that's where labs come in, and really having someone that's fully going to understand what's going on and can read through the symptoms. Because, when we're dealing with a multi-system body, which is what we all are, and our bodies are way smarter than we are, and they're always trying to get to homeostasis, and we're constantly trying to fight it and constantly trying to manipulate it, and we don't have all the facts. It's like you're shooting in the dark. So you have to really dig deep and go a little bit deeper to really understand, okay, am I dealing with adrenals? Am I dealing with thyroid? Am I dealing with gut health stuff? What am I dealing with? Or most likely you're dealing with all the above, and there needs to be a very rhythmic, systematic way that we fix it.
And if you guys remember, we kind of kicked off this whole wellness webinar series with, are you out training your diet? Because that does happen a lot. We see it all the time.
I've done it.
Again, the effort is there, the strategy is wrong. And that's where you need to really think about, is my strategy right for what I'm trying to accomplish? Again, when we talk about being in a fat burning state, when you're doing cardio, 125 to 135 as an average as your BPM, that's going to keep you more in a glycogen state. You start getting up around 150 plus. You're more of an oxidative state. So if your goal is to burn fat, you're really not in the right beats per minute pathway. If you came to me and said, hey, I'm trying to run a marathon, then you are doing the right thing. So again, you got to make sure that the strategy is right for the approach that you're trying to get to. So, all right. So let's talk about adrenal optimization. Like, what are some tips here that we can start talking about to help them optimize their adrenals?
Well, so it depends on what the cause is, and if there's multi reasons, then you have to address all of them. But if it's stress, obviously trying to mitigate the stress. And if you can't mitigate the stress, how are you going to deal with the stress? So is that breath work? Is that meditation? Is that, finding ways to put yourself first? If it's a lifestyle factor, like poor diet, that is pretty straightforward. But like I said, making sure that you're not having other toxic exposure. So by drinking Diet Cokes or trying to use the sugar alcohols or things like that to kind of cheat the system. If it's been a dietary and lifestyle factor, it really needs to be cleaned up for a period of time, because the body needs the nutrients and it needs to detox. If it's related to a chronic illness, you have to address that. If it's due to environmental exposure, obviously you need to rid yourself of the whatever toxic exposure. So if it's mold, you have to eradicate the mold. If it's heavy metals, you need to do chelation. And then if it's trauma, because we all have trauma, and everybody's trauma is personal to them. Figuring out how to work through that and how to manage that, whether it be therapy and the right outlets for that. But your body does deserve the healing that it needs to get there. And so those are the ways that I would do it. And then to piggyback off of what Jamie and Hannah said, besides the lifestyle factors and making sure that you're training correctly for whatever you're bringing in, and making sure what you're consuming is right for your body type and all of that, you have to make sure that you're doing adaptogens. So the way that we treat is we'll do adaptogens, which actually help your body adapt to stress. These are things like ashwagandha, passion flower, you know, mushrooms like reishi, lion's mane, different adaptogens that help your body adapt to whatever's going on. And what's really cool is if you're, you know, if it's 9 a.m. in the morning and you have something trigger you, you can take an adaptogen and it will help you calm down, but won't put you to sleep. But if you need to go to sleep and it's 10 o'clock at night, you can take an adaptogen and it will help you actually go to sleep. The other ways to do it would be through the use of DHEA and pregnenolone, but I highly recommend having labs first because there's just different pathways that those hormones can go down. It kind of looks like Rain Man when you look at the steroid pathway, and it's just really important to understand your genetics and which way it's going to go down because certain people favor different pathways and they can be dangerous or have other side effects.
Right. You know, you had brought up a good point too earlier about some signs of adrenal fatigue are you are craving either A or B, a lot of salt or a lot of sugar. If you're craving both, your adrenals are been hit pretty hard, and you definitely need to be doing some work. Another sign that I see a lot too, and I actually this is when I know that I've been pushing too hard too long, is I need more caffeine more than I usually do. And when I go drink that caffeine, within 20 minutes, I'm yawning and I'm ready to pass out. So I'm trying to drink caffeine to wake up, and that caffeine's actually driving me to be more tired.
And not to use Jamie as an example, because I have the same temperament, self-awareness is really important because if you expect yourself to run at a speed that's not normal, you're probably going to do things like stimulants, and there's nothing wrong with it, but it's really important to make sure that you go through periods of detoxing to allow your body to get rid of that response, because over caffeinating is one of the things that you shouldn't do if you have adrenal fatigue.
Right. And again, when we talk about salt, you know, salt has a bad name to it. Salt is a main mineral in the body. It's responsible for cognitive function. It's responsible for muscle contraction. It's responsible for thyroid production and function. So it plays a big role in the body. There's a distinct difference between bleached white table salt that's junk, and then good salt like kosher salt, sea salt, Celtic sea salt, pink Himalayan sea salt. There's a brand that I really like called Real Salt that's got a blend of everything in it. It's a white bottle. It's got red and blue on it. But you know, you can even do blends where sometimes I've blended real salt with Celtic sea salt in a shaker, and I go that way with it. But and then Hannah had already hit on it too, magnesium. You know, remember there's 11 forms of magnesium. It's not just magnesium citrate that helps you go poo. There's a couple other blends that are very important to you. So I know for Jen, speaking on like her, she takes a lot of magnesium. And a good sign, again, coming back to adrenals and stress, a sign of low magnesium deficiency is your eye starts twitching for some reason. If anybody just has noticed that their eye starts twitching and going, especially if you're under a lot of stress, that's kind of a sign.
Well, and it's actually because your eye muscles are the smallest muscles in your body. And when you experience muscle cramps of any kind, it's actually magnesium and not potassium, because magnesium is responsible for getting potassium into the cells. So it's like if you have any type of muscle cramping, it's magnesium. And yeah, it's magnesium is responsible for over 300 processes in the body. And one that's very calming that crosses the blood-brain barrier is magnesium 3 and 8. So there's just different ones that do different things, and they're all really important.
Right. And just remember, if you do too much salt, as long as you have proper hydration, you're just going to pee it out. It doesn't get stored like a fat, like sugar. I'm sorry. Salt does not get stored like sugar. If you have a higher salt diet and you are adequately hydrated, you'll just urinate it out. So think about that one for a little while. All right, so we've kind of talked on this one a little bit, but let's dig in deeper on it. Hannah, why don't we talk about some ways that we can manage our stress?
All right, so stress on the body, kind of start there with stress that we don't always know that we have. From a dietary standpoint, one of the best things you can do to manage stress on the body is balance your blood sugar throughout the day, because these big spikes and drops in blood glucose are followed by spikes and drops of insulin. And when we get these big peaks of blood glucose, we do see a correlation with higher levels of cortisol. So then again, though, is what came first, the chicken or the egg? Because stress from unregulated blood sugar is going to cause more stress on the adrenals, where we also see adrenal fatigue and stress from external sources does correlate with unregulated blood sugar after the fact. So either way, we see both sides. One of the best things you can do is manage that blood sugar. And that's not to say that you need to eat, a perfectly balanced meal every 3 hours, like is generally recommended, but figuring out what your glucose levels do look like. What is your A1C? What is your fasting insulin? What is your fasting blood glucose? Just to see if that is even an issue to begin with. And if that insulin is high, we do want to work on bringing that down. Doesn't mean cutting carbs out entirely. It just means being smart with where we put them throughout the day, how we pair them, and being conscious about the quality of the foods that you're incorporating in your diet. So blood sugar control, I'd say, is one of the best dietary strategies that you can use here.
Right. And you can control that. You can assist that by incorporating a GDA, a glucose disposal agent, chromium picolinate, ALA, berberine, are some popular ones. But I will also add that is why some people do see really good success with the GLP, GLAs, Ozempic, and Wegovy, and tirzepatide, and semaglutide.
Well, and that's what I was gonna say. For anyone that is on a GLP, you have to be careful because you're manipulating the body's ability to feel that hunger response, like that hunger feeling. And that's why we always try to educate, make sure you are eating, because we're starting to kind of reverse engineer, for Jamie's term earlier, what stress has done to the pancreas. And because stress creates more blood sugar, more people are becoming insulin resistant. Well, that stress also had other issues, caused other issues with the thyroid or the adrenals. That's why you can't just fix one without the other. And so you have to make sure that, yes, while this thing is working, what damage are you doing on the backside that's going to catch up to you when you come off of the medication? So making sure that you keep the insulin. And for ladies out there, this also goes for men. There's a very big relationship with insulin and estrogen. And so you have to make sure that you're constantly fueling your body. And women, we are just programmed to think that we need to starve all day. And it's completely the wrong way that we need to be. So, and yes, while there are times and situations where intermittent fasting and stuff may be a good idea, you really need to understand your biochemistry and your bio-individuality and what your lifestyle allows for. And that's where we were talking about earlier with making sure, you're not just following these plans long-term and they're not the right one.
Right. Let's say you're someone, again, jumping into what somebody else is doing, and let's say they're going to fast, right? But let's say that person who is fasting that's working for is borderline insulin resistant. And let's say that you're on the extreme opposite side of that. Let's say you're extremely insulin sensitive. Let's say their insulin was 18 and yours is 5. Let's say their A1C was 6.1 and yours is 5.1. Let's say that their fasted glucose was 99 and yours is 78. You're going to put a tremendous amount of stress on your body if you tried to go in and doing a fasted workout, because you're already borderline hypo at that point. And by going in and working out, within 15 minutes of that workout, you're probably going to feel very faint, very dizzy, because you're also not hydrated properly. And so therefore, again, your strategy is completely wrong. And your rationality for doing it was completely wrong, because you're just doing what worked for somebody else, not knowing why it was working for them and why it won't work for you. And I'll give you another kind of case study. We were working with a female. She was autoimmune, diabetic, insulin dependent, was always told and taught that she needed to be very low carb. And anytime that she had to wear a constant blood sugar monitor on her, that anytime that she was starting to get 130, she was taught how to dose herself properly with the right amount of insulin and do the calculations on it. And she just kind of noticed that when she would have some carbs, especially because she loved to work out, She lives down in Florida. She's in the sunlight. She's always active. She's got a kid. And she just noticed when she would have some carbs when being active, she felt better. But, she was taught how to how to dose herself based on a reading from her monitor, right? So we started working with her and we kind of showed her how she could incorporate carbs, got her up to about 130 grams of carbs a day, actually reduced her insulin units usage down from 60 to 70 a day down to 20 units a day. So we cut it more than in half, her insulin. She lost about 2 inches in her waist and she lost about 10 pounds. Now, this is where it got interesting. She called us one time and said, hey, I'm under a tremendous amount of stress. I've been using more insulin lately. I'm not sure what's going on. So we coached her through it. I said, do me a favor. I said, the next time you start to feel stressed, and as soon as your constant glucose monitor hits 120, 130, instead of injecting insulin, start box breathing. And then see if it comes down. And if you notice any just a little bit of a reduction in the number, continue to box breathe until you're back in range. So she called me and she's like, what did you just show me? And I'm like, why? What happened? She goes, I didn't need to do insulin. What was I doing wrong? I said, you were coached to follow a number and you were coached to inject. You did everything you were supposed to. I said, but what you were doing is you were chasing a false high because your blood sugar was spiking from adrenals and from stress, not from food. So when you injected yourself with insulin, you then crashed down to 50, within a couple of minutes? She goes, yeah. And then you had to do it again. She goes, yes. She goes, but just by box breathing, I was able to get it down. So this is where we're kind of tying it all together about how you can manage your stress and why it's so important to manage your stress. Because even though you're not maybe an insulin dependent diabetic, you are still spiking your insulin, like Hannah said, multiple times throughout the day, which is almost as equivalent as you might as well just go eat a spoonful of sugar multiple times a day and then wonder why you're not able to move the needle when you're clean eating all the time, you're exercising and you're doing cardio, which yes, your approach is right. But in some cases, if the body's already too stressed, you're still adding stress to it. So in some cases, like what I've done for clients, and I told them, believe it or not, go get a burger and fries, go sleep like a brick, and don't work out or do cardio for the next 2 days and let me know what happens. And they call me back and they're like, I've lost 7 pounds. What did you do?
Well,
And they think the magic was in the burger, like, oh, I get to eat a burger and fries, I get to lose weight. And I'm like, no, you gave your body a good amount of food. You gave it some sodium, even though it wasn't the best form of sodium, and you gave your body the ability to rest.
Well, and that's back to Hannah's point. It's re-regulating the antidiuretic hormone. And so if you notice that you're up constantly urinating, that means you have some dysregulation with that as well. And, to Jamie's point with box breathing, it helps recalibrate your vagus nerve. And your vagus nerve is a nerve that runs through the center of your body that gets into dysfunction when we're stressed because we stop breathing deeply. It does help the mental component, but it also helps from a physiological standpoint that we need to kind of recalibrate. Additionally, we don't realize how much, like he said that she was outside in Florida, like she lives in Florida and does these things. We're constantly in front of blue light, which also downregulates and messes with cortisol because we were meant to, like, as I said, cortisol is released in the morning more so you have energy through the day. Well, we were meant to go with the circadian rhythms of the world, of the planet, of our days, of our normal Earth's circadian rhythm. So that's why it is extremely hard to get like night workers to experience improvement in adrenal fatigue. But there was one other thing that I wanted to say. GLP, glucagon-like peptide, is something that is naturally occurring in the body. That's what tirzepatide, Mounjaro, Ozempic, semaglutide are made of. And you can actually naturally increase your own GLP by eating more fiber, lean protein, healthy fats, and drinking water and having water-rich vegetables in your diet. So we can actually get there on our own and produce more of it by just doing the right things as well.
Right. Hannah, why don't you cover a couple of supplements you'd like to recommend to kind of help support adrenals?
Yeah. I think we mentioned a couple of them in conversation, but just to highlight those, like Jen mentioned, adaptogens. So with that too, we do want to be wary that, as the name implies, your body will adapt to a specific adaptogen over time. So adaptogens they help the body regulate the stress response. So if you're just supplementing with ashwagandha every day, no break, that will become ineffective from, at some time. So, ashwagandha is a great one, but maybe you're cycling that through with rhodiola or licorice root, holy basil, lion's mane. It's just so you're getting a variety of different adaptogens. So that's a great one. To the blood sugar to the blood sugar point too, like we were discussing, things like berberine, which is being nicknamed nature's Ozempic. I think that's a little dramatic, but what's that?
It's a little, it does make GOP and it does work, but it's definitely not as potent.
Yeah, it's a little dramatic to say that, but berberine's a good one. Jamie mentioned chromium picolinate. Inositol is a good one too that we see be helpful with insulin resistance. So, of course, back to magnesium, specifically magnesium threonate or magnesium glycinate. Both would be great if we could do both of those. So I'd say, I mean, I know I just named a bunch, but between magnesium, adaptogens, and compounds to help with blood sugar regulation, I think those are 3 good places to start.
Yeah, Jen, you got anything you want to add to that?
No, I mean, and not until we get labs, like DHEA is a supplement, pregnenolone is a supplement, but and sometimes you can get like a adaptogen blend with pregnenolone, but you do want to be careful. I would only do those if I knew that I was deficient.
Right. Which then leads into I'll let you answer this one, Jen. What are some key factors you want to look at when it comes to like blood work? Like what are some of the ones we want to definitely be pulling and looking at?
Cortisol, and we're actually going to change how we pull our cortisol. It's going to be salivary cortisol. But it's really important when you have a provider send you to get labs that you don't go work out prior, because you will actually get a cortisol dump, and so it will be a false read.
Or caffeine.
Yes, or caffeine. DHEA, I'm going to be adding DHEAS and then pregnenolone, as well as the thyroid, because usually if your adrenals are taxed, your thyroid and your other hormones are also going to be taxed. So I pull, I think when we hear hormones, we think of only the sex hormones. When I like to look at hormones, I like to look at everything that's being addressed with the adrenals and then the thyroid and then also your sex hormones.
Right. And then we'll talk about a little bit more managing and stress. I'll just kind of rattle some off. Infrared sauna, hot cold transition showers, cold plunge, AM fasted walks, if you can walk outside for about 10 minutes with no sunglasses, that's a good way of doing it. Journaling AM and PM. I think it's really good to journal both times because you also get kind of your emotions out for the day. As you journal in the PM is a good way to do it. Essential oils work really well. And then we talked about properly eating, properly supplementing, supporting those. And then I'd probably say, going as far as making sure you do as much as you can the night before to support your morning. So you're not, starting your day stressed out, running around, trying to get organized and out the door because something unexpected happened and now you're running behind. So those would be some good tips in order to get yourself up and going. And then I'm going to lead into what this is all going into. Like we said, this is a 2-part series. And the next time we talk on this, we're really going to be diving into the thyroid. And like we had mentioned, how adrenals and stress can downregulate thyroid production. Remember that thyroid is a hormone, T3 and T4, 2 very important ones. I've kind of said this on social media, but I'll say it here too. I find it interesting that when people will go either to their primary, their OB, or to a hormone replacement clinic, and they're going there in the hopes of finding out if low hormones is the root cause behind what's going on as far as how they feel. And the one thing they don't really ever talk about or pull is the thyroid. And again, I'll kind of specify that again. People are going to a hormone replacement facility or their OB or their doctor to discuss hormones. And yet those two are not being pulled and looked at accurately. That's a big problem, because if you look up thyroid symptoms, they almost nearly mimic the same symptoms that the marketing campaign for low testosterone clinics are pushing out. So again, you have to do things in phases. You have to work on nutrition and gut. You have to work on adrenal/stress. You have to optimize thyroid, and then you can start looking at other hormones. But so as we lead up and into this, this adrenal talk is going to lead us into a big thyroid discussion on the next episode that we do on this. So if you enjoyed this one, I think you're really going to enjoy the next one, because this is a small stepping stone into the big pool of what we're going to get into, which is a thyroid talk. So we'll kind of open it up. We have about 13 minutes left. If anybody has some questions they'd like to ask, and we can get you guys answered. Again, we really appreciate everybody tapping in. So if you want to just add, let's start discussing. Just go ahead and throw it in the chat or unmute yourself and go and ask.
Jamie, could you talk a little more about types of training that would be appropriate for someone in adrenal fatigue?
Me?
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know she said
and
or Jen, either.
No, I'm gonna let him do it, but I will say this. I was wearing a continuous glucose monitor for a while, and that's where I really realized what I was doing to my body, because you brought up the fact of blood sugar, and I hadn't eaten for a few hours and I was getting ready to work out, and something stressful happened and my blood sugar shot right up. And the old me would have gone and trained to calm down, because that's how I get my stress out. And I realized that that was the worst thing I could do. And so even though my labs, when I would get them pulled, would show that everything was fine, I was doing things, because the lab is only a snapshot in time. I was doing things outside of that window that were causing me to become more insulin resistant, and so having a harder time to, burn fat. So that's where, when Jamie talked about like making sure that you have more restorative workouts, is really important.
So how would I train if I was in adrenal fatigue like that and going? So two approaches would be, you could do do circuit, where you would, again, you want to keep your heart rate, I would say somewhere between, with an average of 110 to 115. So you could do like two exercises. Let's say you do a bigger movement like a lat pull down, and then go into a smaller muscle group like a tricep press down. And then we go into what's called like an active rest, which would be like a plank hold. And then you would rest for up to 2 minutes. The key ingredient there is the rest, letting yourself come back down. And then the same way as like you would actually train in a ketogenic diet, you would do a more steady state cardio. You would not be doing HIIT, because again, we want to keep that heart rate low. We'd actually want to keep it around the 110 to 115 range. And then if you are lifting with weights and you want to individualize, like just do a back day, do a leg day, do a shoulder day, then you're going to want to be in that 5 to 8 rep range. And you're again going to want to be that 2.5 minute range on rest, because you want to let yourself reset back into the ATP range and stay out of glycogen and oxidative range when it comes to working out. That stress, like Jen said, even though it's good stress from working out, when the body's too stressed, you don't know where it's coming from. I've used the analogy of, you're so stressed because of one person, and that person you're around them all the time, and then the next thing you know, everything and everyone is making you mad, and it's really not them, it's that one person. And once you can get away from that person, then everything else calms back down. So until you can really identify what is really stressing the body out, then you have to remember, even good stress is still stress to the body. So giving yourself those rest times, going into more that heavy set lifting, it's going to be better off, because just like with the keto diet, and you're not getting that glycogen stage, you're more in that ATP, you're not allowing your blood sugars to come up and then come back down. So you're keeping a lower blood sugar level, you're keeping a lower heart rate level, and the body's able to recover and work better through those type of things.
Got it.
Does anybody else have some questions? Let me think. Here's some things that people might want to hit on. Some debate about cold plunging. The one thing I want to encourage people about with this is cold plunge. Cold plunging is more than just getting, because one, it detoxes the body, it removes heavy metals and does remove stress from the body. But two, I think this is one of the biggest components missed, because you get into the debate, well, it's bad for hypertrophy training because XYZ and XYZ. It's a mindset thing. It's challenging, and you're literally coaching and teaching your body to react and to respond and not hesitate, which then also will help bring down stress in your day-to-day life and will help you manage and handle stressful moments also, because you become less reactive, because you learn to think very quickly and not become as reactive on that. So I think, to answer, like, anybody has cold plunging questions, what's the big benefit behind it? That, to me, why I do it mainly, is for that exact reason. It's to train my mind to react without hesitation, so I can get to point A to point B very quickly, and it keeps me from overreacting to the situations. So, all right. Well, all right. Do you cold plunge after sauna or before? I personally like to cold plunge after the sauna, because as you open up the pores and as you sweat out the toxins, you don't want them going back in. So by getting into the cold plunge, rinses everything off, closes the pores down, and do it. Is exactly why firefighters get treated with cold water after a fire. That's one way they remove the toxins off from the suits and from the chemicals they're exposed to. They'll undress and they'll walk through the spray, and and then they'll go right into a cold shower. Go ahead.
Just make sure that if you are doing it, no matter if you're doing it after a sauna or not, if you have any cardiac issues or you have not been doing box breathing, I would suggest warming up to that, because you can actually give yourself a vasovagal response by holding your breath. So just make sure, if you have any cardiac issues, I would definitely talk to your cardiologist first, and then also make sure that you're good with breath work.
Yeah. And now you could do a cold plunge sauna cold plunge. I usually would do, especially like if we're on vacation and I've had some alcohol, I'll sauna, plunge. I'll do that twice, rapidly detox, and it's like I didn't even have a drink before. That's one way you can do it. Studies do show sometimes you can cold plunge prior to a training session, because of the dopamine and serotonin dump that you get for 2 hours. So that's one beneficial way too, of you could cold plunge and then go to working out. So yeah, you can do it both ways. I know some people that they find it very difficult to go from the sauna to the cold plunge. They'd rather do the plunge than the sauna. But that's my reasoning for why I will sauna first and then cold plunge, because I want the toxins off of me, and I don't want them being reintroduced into the skin because the pores are open. All right. Well, we'll conclude tonight with all that. I hope everybody found this informative and gained something out of this conversation tonight. So again, our goal is to always educate and pass what we are very grateful to learn and educate people. And like Jen said, our mission is to help as many people as we can, whether they're working with us or not. If we can give someone a little nugget of information to help them change our life, then that's what this is all about. So thanks for your guys' time, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next webinar.
Thank you all. Thanks, Anna.
Thanks, Anna. See you. Bye.